Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your practice. What is attachment? What do we really mean by breaking free from attachment? Emancipation, as it were, liberation. Depending on the translations and the languages we read about the teachings of Shakyamuni, this crux, this subtle yet critical issue of understanding. What is it to live life completely free of restriction, free to experience fully every aspect of potential in our lives? We've been talking about the Alaya consciousness in the Lankavatara. We've been talking about this database, this warehouse of tendencies and conditions that manifests our individual experiences, albeit through an emergent property, the mind, and these other consciousnesses, these senses of seeing, hearing, tasting, feeling, so on. Those are our tools of perception, right? But in Buddhism, those tools of perceptions are also the trap. Because as much as we've manifested all these wonderful facilities to see, to perceive color, to perceive sounds, to identify, quantify, qualify, right? All of the this, not that, that, not that, so on and so forth. It's amazing. It allows us to dissect and discriminate every single aspect of potential in manifestation, although that's not the way we experience it. And there's the rub. The way we experience the world through these amazing mechanisms of discernment and identification, by virtue of that very same mechanism, when we identify something, we essentially freeze it in time. You are now this. I call you this. And because I call you this, this is what you will be for all time. You are this. Permanent. Yes, intellectually I understand that you will degrade over time and you will, dissolve, disappear, whatever. But you are this. This is the great illusion. And it's not something we're trying to get rid of. Understand, in Buddhism, we're not trying to annihilate all of that in order to somehow sift through all this stuff to find something transcendent, something better, something holy, right? No, the idea is, we're in a physical universe. We are experiencing time-space. That's great. We're not trying to get rid of it. That's the very reason, this time-space that we exist in, that we're able to experience it observe it. So no, we're not trying to get rid of it. We're trying to identify that particular aspect of our mind that, due to the fact we identify everything, that there's a sneaky little attribute that comes with that. That sneaky little attribute is our attachment, our what to call it, like the little voices in our minds that we don't listen to, that are constantly really overjoyed and self-satisfied that I have identified. That is wood. That is mine. That is yours. There's another thing going on there, and it's not something you can grab. It's not an organ. It's not material. It's not a color. It's not a smell. It's not of all of these senses that are so busy identifying anything. It's of something else. It's a quality of mind that likes to hang on to, possess that warehouse of discriminations. And that's all well and good. Okay, I have this huge database of experience of life, yeah. But that's not the problem. Again, it's not the thing that's the problem. It's the relationship to it, the identification of it, indicating, constructing, contriving a self, an owner. And you could say, well, there's no problem with that either. The problem identified in Buddhism isn't that any of that is wrong. It's identifying, discriminating that. Using the very facilities we have for identifying and discrimination, Buddhism goes ahead and runs muck, totally wild with it to the nth degree, right? For one purpose and one purpose only. We're constantly stressing and anxious about our identification, right? What are all the big, quote unquote, questions in life? Who am I? Why am I here? What is life? What is meaning? All of those questions come from that constructed self, not the real self, not the self that is physical and moment to moment instantiating all of this freight train of karma, potential, experiencing. That's all wonderful. But there's this other layer that's anxious, stressful about owning it, about having it, about maintaining it, because that's wrong. There is no holding on to. There is no permanent self. There is no thing like a bag of Bob or a box of Betty, otherwise known as a soul. I mean, how profound a craving is that to want to be a permanent, eternal Frank, Stuart, Edna, Margot. What? It's when you say it out loud, it's like, what the hell are you talking about? But that's in fact what we're doing. Our ego, our little ego in our brain, in our mind, in our mind, wants to have this warm, fuzzy confidence that it's always been here and always will be here, and it's being watched over and it's being coddled and it can't be destroyed. And because then all of this stuff will continue to be possessed by, owned by, controlled by. And what Shakyamuni identified was, well, that weird little thing there, that contortion of reality, that somehow becomes an operating principle for a human life, that is the source of all of these anxieties, all of these worries. Oh, I'm going to lose that. Oh, I don't have enough of that. Oh, I need more of that. No, you have everything. You are everything. What are you chasing after? Why are you worried about losing it? Everything is happening moment to moment. You're building all of this stress and illusion based on illusions, like waking up from a dream that you're flying over the city or the wherever you are, and that now you're worried that you might not be able to fly anymore, that you might fall from the sky. Never asking yourself, why are you worried about something that doesn't exist? What? But I want it to exist because it identifies me, who I am. But the question of who I am is a question I'm answering every single moment of every single time space. I am being. We are who we are being. And that is amazing, because when you go to that mindset, then being is huge. It's immense. It's larger than you can fathom. But when you spend all your time worried about what you are as a matter of identification and possession, that's incredibly narrow, small, stressful, fearsome. So that's why you have this clutching, wanting to hang on to whatever little bit you have. But it's difficult to, on the one hand, dissect that samsaric behavior, the way the mind collects and owns and identifies and constructs that ego self, and then to discuss that mechanism itself, with all of its various consciousnesses, is also constructed. That makes you a little nervous, right? As you learn and you practice Buddhism, you start to worry you're slipping away. That's your ego that's frightened, that raises doubts, that says, yeah, but. Yeah. But if you're to get fully liberated, emancipated, to experience the glory of being with an encompassing mind of life total, as unfathomable as that may seem, there has to be a paradigm shift. There has to be a great rebirth of sorts of mind, liberated from all of that database, warehouse, knowing, ownership. It's a scary step, because if you let go of the warehouse, maybe you'll have nothing. But that's the illusion again, the ego trying to convince you, don't go away. But you're not. Because what you instead have, instead of the warehouse and the database, is the entirety of the universe. The energy, the momentum, the kinetics of life in its entirety. Can you even conceive of what that looks like? Well, you and I can through Namo Myo Renge Kyo, through our instantiation of that enlightened mind, that capacity. We can experience it, and we do. How do we integrate that experience with this samsaric experience? Right? Because we're not annihilating anything, we're experiencing it far more grandly, yet without the anxieties and the stress of possession, of constructions of self that are paltry, small little delusions. But we don't know that until we mature our mind. Yeah? Why do I say all of this? Because this is the Lankavatara. This is what the personage of Mahamati, who represents all of these students of Shakyamuni, students like you and I, who are trying to get beyond learning and realization and fully grasp bodhisattvaness, which is itself the solution to that problem. How to course through this samsaric physical time-space life, all with all of its various things, with that clear, pervasive, unegofied experience. How do we do that? This is Mahayana. And the Lankavatara is working diligently to explore for those students who's just not quite getting over that hump of samsaric mind, to perceive this other. And eventually what we'll do is we'll add another consciousness to this whole scholarship to identify this is another realm, a realm outside of this karmic freight train of energy, but still within it. But we'll identify it as outside of it so you can understand how divorced it is from the database, from that warehouse. Buddhaness. Still struggling to identify that in the Lankavatara, but it comes. So here we go. Further, Mahamati, there are 9 kinds of transformation as held by the philosophers endorsing the doctrine of transformation. Now, listen to what I just said, because it's very important that you become more discerning now. We've been talking about this problem of discernment and identification versus discernment without identification, without self-creation in relation to discernment. It's quixotic. How do the words work here? We don't really have good words for it. So we end up talking about it in different ways. And one of the ways Shakyamuni does this is he identifies all of these different aspects of discernment, of the samsaric mind, and he labels it as this is the way the philosophers talk about it. He's talking about it, but he's saying this is the earthly discriminating mind's logistical rational way of dissecting the functions of the mind. And once I get through showing you all of these dissections of the mind and how the mind creates this database warehouse, then we're going to walk out the door. Warehouse, that's just one warehouse of billions and billions. What we're going to talk about is the warehousing as a suchness of behaviors of the mind. And just by saying that, we're going to identify our mind as outside of that mind of identification. There's the detachment. Do you see? So here we go. He says there are 9 kinds of identification the philosophers can talk about. From the philosophers being the ego self, yes? That brilliant, brilliant ego. 1, the transformation of form. And as usual, we'll get into dissections of what all of these labels mean. So don't worry, it's coming. Transformation of form. 2, the transformation of characteristics. 3, the transformation of cause. 4, the transformation of concordance. The transformation of view, the transformation of origin, the transformation of nature, the transformation of manifest conditions, and the transformation of manifest work. Now you can hear this kind of thinking. It's in Gongyo, right? Where we identified 10 factors. And on and on. The 3,000 realms is a single thought moment. All of these are discernments, right? But they're in service to a much grander idea. And this push-pull, if you will, of learning these concepts in order to open our understanding of how the mind works vis-a-vis escaping all of those, that web of traps, if you will. We get lost in the description. We get lost in the dissections because identification, everything we learn, we're happily constructing more ego, more now I know this, right? This is the trap. And yet without study, it's difficult for us to appreciate the nature of what it is we're trying to escape. It's a bit of a conundrum, isn't it? Which is why by the time we get to the Lotus Sutra, we have a simple method. We just go directly to the answer. But it's helpful for our samsaric selves to have this level of dissection to rely upon to build why. Because without confidence, without determination, without knowing absolutely that we are manifesting our greatest potential, our ego is always going to slip in there and try to give us doubt, trying to make us lazy, trying to make us just habit forming, habit energy. We don't want our enlightenment to be habit energy. We want our enlightenment to be instantiated, timeless, without beginning, on 24/7, yeah? And that takes a mental shift of commitment, of confidence. Do you commit to things you're not confident about? Maybe, but not for long. Practice has to be ongoing, day to day, moment to moment. Yeah, it takes effort because we're in samsara. These, Mahamati, are the 9 views of transformation expounded by all the philosophers in accordance with their secret teaching, and they are all founded upon the dualism of being and non-being. So he's repeating it enough times now make it clear what he's talking about as opposed to what he's teaching. Continuing. Now, Mahamadi, by the transformation of form, is meant the alteration of form and appearance, as gold takes various shapes when it's made into all kinds of ornaments, jewelry, etc. Transformation of form. This is a physical transformation, in other words. For example, gold is seen made into a bracelet, a necklace, a philthot, whatever that is, or whatnot. Though the gold itself remains the same, varieties of articles are made of it, and all different in form, that is, in their transformations. But it's important to remain aware that the use of the word transformation here has a different application depending on what you're talking about. Yes, gold is formed, or like anything, into different forms. But in that transformation is the a priori, the fundamental assumption that gold is itself a thing, a real, permanent, extant thing made in and of itself. And I say it that way because, again, I remind you, everything is a manifestation, moment to moment, of potential. So if we view that same lump of gold as a suchness of gold, as a collection of properties and karmic energy manifesting as gold, we begin to release mentally the idea that this gold is permanent, has always been here, is a thing. Rather, it's a process that is thinging, right? It's a suchness that is gold, and we're transforming that suchness into different forms. Or said another way, if that rock, that chunk of gold were actually permanent, a gold thing, then you couldn't manipulate it into other forms. You couldn't transform it. The reason you can transform gold is because it is itself transformation all the time. It is manifesting moment to moment suchness. It's evidence of a much larger process of making, being, and disappearing. Because it's in a state of flux, moment to moment, it can be influenced and manipulated into different things. This is the entire Lankavatara. This is the mental, cognitive shift that needs to be made about everything to understand the profundity of life itself. That is the detachment. I no longer hold a rock, a chunk of gold. I hold a suchness of gold. Therefore, I am experiencing the gold in its fluctuating, moment-to-moment manifestation. It's an involvement, a co-participation, rather than a I am this, you are that, I own you, into we are together observing this process. Wow, amazing, yes? That makes sense? In the same way, Mahamadi, there is a general transformation of things which is discriminated by other philosophers as coming from a causal agency. as though the chunk of gold were provided for us. See, once you make the gold its own thing, then the philosopher or the mind of collecting and ownership has to, or conveniently provides a lineage for that being offered to. I found this amongst the that. But that's all compounded illusion, because this is just happening moment to moment, in flux all the time. So you see where they are not right, nor are they otherwise, because the process is ongoing and things are manifesting, suchness goes on. So you can see that there is a producing and produced, but that's the philosopher's illusion. If you read Nagarjuna or Vasubandhu, their language will be far more clinical, in that you hear me saying the produced and the producing. See, that whole allusion to the process is the thingifying, the ownership. Whereas in actuality, nothing is produced as in done. Everything is in this constant state of flux. And if something seems to your mind to be produced, this is the chunk of gold, then the implication is that there must have been a producer and producing. But that's a whole drama built around the primary illusion, not understanding that everything is a manifestation of potential all the time. Back to this. All differentiation in transformation is to be regarded as due to discrimination, such as the thickening of milk into curds and the ripening of fruit into liquor. Mahamadi, like this thickening and ripening, each transformation is a transformation rising from discrimination, which is discriminated by the philosophers. Really, there is nothing transformed, for the external objects of which being and non-being are discriminated are what is seen of mind itself and have no reality of their own. So what is that, again, what is that saying? So we're seeing a process. We're seeing a process in flux. In another way, you could say that his example of the milk curdling, or we can stay with the gold. That simply because we now have a bracelet made from that suchness of gold, that suchness of bracelet was always in the suchness of gold. It's just that through manipulations, we have gold in another form, but it's still goldness. Now we added characteristics to it, which are braceletness. It's not that something is born from another thing, because that is permanentizing. That is making a thing. Like the bracelet is one thing and the gold nugget is another thing. But that's the product of discriminations, of our consciousnesses trying to adhere, hold on to, make permanent, identify. I now have a bracelet, whereas previously I had a nugget. Nothing's changed. Really, no thing has changed, just discriminations, just building that database. You starting to get this now? It's, yeah, when it permeates through several forms, this is where sometimes we struggle with it. But from the place of Buddhahood, Why would it matter the forms of gold? It's just suchnesses, suchness of brightness, suchness of color, suchness of, right? It's all the same to me, right? In the same way, Mahamadi, what is regarded by the ignorant and simple-minded as the evolving of objects is no more than the discrimination of their own mind. And Mahamadi, there is really nothing evolving, nothing disappearing, as it is like seeing things that evolve in a vision and in a dream. Mahamadi, it is like perceiving the rise and disappearance of things in a dream. It is like the birth and death of a barren woman's child. So it is said. The transformation of the form in time and the embracing of soul in the elements and sense organs, which is in its middle way existence, the antarabhava. Remember, this is reference to the Nidana again. They who thus imagine the birth of a child are not wise men. He's flipping back and forth now between the barren woman and transformation of things, right? The Buddhas do not discriminate the world as subject to the chain of origination, but they regard the causation which rules this world as something like the city of the Gandharvas. So this was passed through very quickly here, but I want you to understand, we talk a great deal about the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Noble Path, and the Nidana. The Nidana is very important. But what he just said, I want you to really hear that. The Nidana, and I've talked about it before, study early writings from Julius Evola, who really takes apart the Nidana in his book on the Doctrine of Awakening. The Nidana itself, and Shakyamuni has alluded to this several times so far, is a teaching from the philosopher's base. Now that may come as a shock to all of you, but the Nidana is itself an identification and discrimination of the process of samsaric development. Let me say that another way. In Julius Evola, he adopts a it's an old book, early 20th century book, so he adopts the rhetoric of, he's Italian, he's not applying Christianity to it, but that's his cultural norm, so his vernacular comes from it. So he says things like, and I'm paraphrasing, that the Nidana is a descent into. And the first question you have to ask yourself is, descent from what? Descent from where? Right? This is the popular rhetoric of religion. This implication that we come from a place, we're here for some particular reason, usually atonement because we're deficient or bad or whatever, for whatever reason, and there are many, and then we atone for a lifetime and then we go somewhere else. This is this idea of soul. This is the quintessential argument of the ego. The I am of the ego insists that this I am of this life is a temporary thing that this ego comes from or is modeled after something glorious, goes through this gauntlet of life, only then to be released to go to this wonderful place, or if I don't do right? Buddhism doesn't do any of that. It sees all of that as incredible juvenile thinking, unreasonable thinking, unprovable thinking. It's simply not a real experience, but it's treated as though it were real. If you can live in this moment, there's no need for such craziness. Therefore, no stress, no anxiety, fully experiencing this life for the glorious expanse of experience that it is. Live, my friends. Live now. This is the now. This is the life. This is where you are. Moment to moment to moment to moment. The rest of it, meaningless. It's a dream. It's not happening. The past is gone. The future not yet written. Not yet experienced. Your experience of life is now, 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 now. Be in that process. And look at the wonderful manifestations of suchness all around you, including your own suchness. Rather than assigning every little aspect and hair of your persona, realize that that is just a suchness of energies through time-space. Experience it fully. Don't restrict yourself. The Buddhas do not discriminate the world as subject to the chain of origination. That's huge. When you're liberated, when you're emancipated from this process of identification, then you experience life without the Nidana. He said it out loud. This fascination we have with the attractions of energies manifesting into thingifying, into all the way down, descending into birth, the womb, boom, human, emerging a mind of experience. All of that is fascinating. It's glorious to understand in its process. But from Buddhahood, that's a suchness. We observe it. We're not in it. We're not roiled by it. We're not owned by it. It's just this fantastic process of manifesting life in so many forms, uncountable forms. All right. That to me is a critical, it certainly was for me as I was studying Buddhism and I got totally immersed into the Nidana and the process and trying to identify it in modern terms, in scientific terms, in experiential terms, from every angle. How does that Nidana work, right? I have diagrams about it on this channel, various videos talking about the dependent origination and so forth. But all of that is an expedient means. It's a teaching to indicate how we glue ourselves to things, our identity. From Buddhaness, from that shift of perception and witnessing of life, we observe the Nidana. We're not in the Nidana. It becomes a process we watch with fascination, but no longer grips our identity. It's just one of countless formations, yeah? All right, that's it for today. Thank you. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe. That's so helpful to the Sangha to grow this channel, to get more people exposed and conversant, confident about their practice of Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Yeah? Take care of yourself. Be kind to yourself. Keep your practice strong, and I'll see you in the next one, okay? Thanks so much. Bye for now.